Okay, here's the thing that's coming to mind, and you can tell me if this is a good answer or if it's too abstract, right? Okay, there's this thing that happens in indie games, right? Indie games, like people have independently made games for a long time, but indie games kind of became its own thing in this 2007 to 2011 time, right? When AAA games got very expensive, but indie games also could get on consoles and Steam and stuff. And so indie games became this thing where the reason people want to play your game is for a different reason than for AAA games usually, right? Like you have some interesting gameplay that a AAA game wasn't going to do, or you have a different visual style or something like that, right? There's always like what indie games became was a way of having your game be interesting that is not we have the biggest budget, right? So like Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty and all that, the way that they are interesting is just that they spend a huge amount of money building giant games, right? And so indie developers have to do something a little bit different from that. Now, there are different subcategories then, right? So there are people who are doing like art games or games that experiment more with the medium or just are trying to do new gameplay, right? And then there's other games that are more like traditional games, but that are independent, right? And for the category that I'm in, where we're trying to do something new and different, there's a weird problem that people run into, and I'm going to characterize it as, and actually this happens on the other side too, but I'm going to characterize it as either not having high enough standards for your own work or not being self-critical enough, right? And this doesn't have to be negative, right? It doesn't have to be negatively self-critical. Like sometimes indies get all moody and they say, oh, everything I do is bad or whatever. I don't mean that, but I do mean, like making a game is hard. And so two things can happen. One is you finally make something and you're really excited that you made something, right? And so you have a really positive attitude toward it. Like, it's like if you have a baby, you really like your baby and you think it's great. But this is not advice for families, right? This is advice for making a game. You have to look at the game relatively objectively and see what the problems are, because there are going to be a lot of problems, right? And the thing is, you can't solve all the problems because games are just really complicated. So you have to pick what's important to solve and what's not important to solve. And so the big mistake that people make, and I'm finally getting to the point of this answer. The big mistake that people make is when they make a game that's about something, whatever that is. They don't notice all the problems that are concerned with what the game is about, right? And they don't optimize for solving those specific problems. And I really feel like I should say something concrete here. Okay, so, we'll talk about, games that I worked on that people might know. So for Braid, for example, it actually started with an idea about doing a quantum mechanics game. It turned into just a time rewind game. And then at that point, it was like, okay, this game is about rewinding and doing crazy stuff and having puzzles that are surprising that use time, right? But I didn't then just keep going and make a regular platformer, but with time stuff. I took out most of the regular platformer things so I could focus on the time stuff, right? And whenever there was a problem, either in implementation or visuals, or anything, I would make the choice in favor of the time part of the game and away from other aspects of the game. So if you try to play Braid like without doing time puzzles, it's a very, very boring platformer. There's hardly any monsters. They don't have very interesting movement patterns, but that's on purpose because that helps you understand the other part of the game, right? And so like I at some point I decided, I want to cut away all these other potential parts of the game so that I can focus on this other thing, right? And with the Witness also, like interactivity in the Witness is very minimal because I didn't want to introduce anything that would confuse or cause problems relative to the core idea of the game, which I don't want to spoil for anyone who hasn't played it. But the art style is built around that. Everything is built around this core idea that I wanted to make happen as successfully as possible. And so what happens is people say, I want to make a game about a certain thing, and they sort of make the game and some parts of it work and some parts don't. And then maybe they make the controls better or something. But it is very, very rare that I look at an independent game and see that it's optimized for its, for what it's about, for its strong points. Like I usually look at it and say, I can see what you would have done here that would have made this game stronger, and for whatever reason, people don't do that stuff. I don't know. That was a really long answer. And it's a very, this is a very difficult question to answer because at some level, it's the very core of what I do. Like this is my job in running a studio, is to make sure that we do this. But it's still really hard to explain because it can get really subtle.
But it was I really, really, really liked that answer. Thank you for that. I'm very interested in writing processes and how to get a better writer, for instance. And one of the core ideas is always that we don't have to put super complicated, super sophisticated sentences with full of sophisticated words into the text in order to tell our story. The clearer and the more precise we can build sentences, also short sentences, the better of a writer we can become often. And I just, this reflected so much what you just mentioned about game development, that in the end, if you have one really clear, interesting part of the game mechanic, which you want to convey, and then you break it down to this mechanic and really focus around that, I think this is gold. This is really good.
Yeah, although I wouldn't even say mechanic. Like mechanic is a weird word.
Just as one example, just the thing which is important to you within your game.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know how to say more about it. I feel like I need to say more about it, but I also don't know what to say that won't just be a repeat of what I just said. It's very important. Like so if you want to be a better game designer or producer or something, right? Some job description, there's a bunch of skills that you can work on, right? Because games are difficult. Many skills come to bear. And some of the skills are obvious. Like if you program, you could be a better programmer, right? Like you can get code written faster, or the code that you write could run faster or have fewer bugs the first time. So these things are all obvious, but there are always skills that are more subtle. And sometimes these are the things that really matter. So, like one thing about programming is, like implementing the thing that is really best for the design that you're trying to make, right? Like is a skill. And it's a less obvious skill than these other programming skills. And so a lot of times people just don't even think of that as something to work on, right? And so you end up with these problems where people program stuff and it's kind of what it was supposed to do on paper, but not really what the system needs to do to make the game good, right? Or I don't know. I feel like I need to think for a while to come up with good examples of